Baltimore, Maryland, a city with a rich and often turbulent history, and persisted. This includes a collection of cases that have baffled investigators and haunted the city for decades. One such case is that of 14-year-old Carolyn Wasilewski, whose remains were found in a rail yard. Days before she had testified in a carnal knowledge case, that's what they called it at the time, involving one of her friends. Then there's the case of a man named Ray Rivera, who supposedly jumped off the roof of the Belvedere Hotel in 2006. His manner of death was ruled to be undetermined, but many theories persist about the case, like the idea that he was killed by a disgruntled reader who had given bad advice to. Rivera ran a financial newsletter where he gave recommendations to investors about which stocks to put money into, so some figure that he had lost someone money and they killed him. The case of Sister Cesnik is another such unsolved mystery. On January 3rd, 1970, the remains of Sister Cesnik were found in a dumping site on Monumental Avenue in Hawthorne, Baltimore County. She'd been reported missing on November 7, 1969, from her home at the Carriage House Apartments in Baltimore City. At the time she disappeared, Sister Cesnik was taking a break from her duties with the Roman Catholic Church and was teaching at Western High School in Baltimore. The last sighting of her was just before she left her apartment to run some errands at the Edmonston Village Shopping Center. Her body was discovered on a cold January day in 1970, almost 2 months after she went missing. Her body was found partially unclothed and she had suffered severe head injuries, but there was not much physical evidence at the crime scene. Investigators at the time suspected that Sister Cesnik was confronted outside her home as she returned from shopping and was forced into her car. She was then taken to Monumental Avenue where she was attacked and killed. Her vehicle was located in the early hours of November 8, 1969, parked close to her apartment. Many individuals in Baltimore suspect that Cesnik was murdered due to her potential knowledge about sexual abuse at Archbishop Keough High School, where she taught English in the years before her death, and where multiple girls, now grown adults, have alleged they were assaulted by male priests. In this video, I will explore the timeline of events, the key figures involved, and the various investigations and allegations that have emerged over the years, including the potential connection between Cesnik's murder and the abuse scandal at Keough. Cesnik's case is still unsolved, and she deserves to have her story told, and her killer found so that her family, friends, and the community of Baltimore can finally get justice. Let's get started. Catherine Ann Cesnik was born on November 17, 1942, and spent her childhood in the Lawrenceville area of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She attended St. Mary Assumption Roman Catholic Church and School, which was run by the School Sisters of Notre Dame, a religious teaching order. SSND nuns served in a variety of ministries like teaching and prison ministries, but also combating racism and fighting poverty. In 1960, Cesnik graduated as the valedictorian of her high school class, having also served as the May Queen and held leadership roles in both the senior class and student council. While she was a student at St. Augustine's Catholic High School, she considered pursuing a life in the religious community, and after finishing high school, Cesnik relocated to Baltimore to join the Baltimore province of the SSND in 1960, taking her final vows on July 21st, 1967, and adopting the name Sister Juanita. According to her sister, Sister Cesnik felt a divine calling to become a nun and had a natural talent for teaching. And soon she started her teaching journey at Archbishop Keough High School when it opened in 1965. There she taught English literature and led the drama club. Sister Cesnik was known for her energy, enthusiasm, and dedication as a teacher, and she was particularly attentive and supportive of her students at the all-girls institution. Sister Cesnik was seen as a big sister figure by the girls at the high school and reminded many of a real-life Maria, the character played by Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music. The nun played the guitar and created musicals for the students to perform. And after they read Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, she took them to see the 1968 film adaptation. She also came up with funny vocabulary games to encourage the girls to learn and share new, unusual words with each other. Like many religious figures during the chaotic 60s, Sister Cesnik asked for a break from her order, which was approved. She moved into an apartment at the Edmonston Village area of Baltimore with another nun and began teaching at Western High School in the fall of 1969. On November 7, 1969, after a quick shopping trip, Sister Cesnik didn't come back home, leading her to be reported missing. The evening of November 7th, around 7:30 p.m., Sister Cesnik had told her roommate, Helen Russell Phillips, that she was going to the bank and then shopping for an engagement gift for her cousin. Reports from that time say she cashed a $255 paycheck at a bank in Cantonsville, Maryland, and then went to the Edmonston Village Shopping Center where she bought buns at Muley's Bakery. When she didn't return by 11 p.m., Phillips called two priest friends who came over and contacted the police. Later that night, Sister Cesnik's new green Ford Maverick was found unlocked and parked illegally a block away from her apartment, even though she had a designated parking spot behind the building. There was no sign of the nun anywhere. Jean Werner remembers a cold November day in 1969 when Father Joseph Maskell, a counselor and chaplain at Keough, invited her to his office and suggested they take a drive. After the final bell rang at 2:40 p.m., Jean, a 16-year-old junior, got into the passenger seat of his light blue Buick Roadmaster. It was common for Maskell to give students rides home or take them to medical appointments during school hours. At that time, he was 30 years old and had been the main spiritual and psychological counselor at Keough for 2 years, making him a family figure in the community. The annual tuition at Keough was only $200, which appealed to working-class families in the deeply Catholic area of southwest Baltimore who couldn't afford more expensive private schools. Many parents had attended Maskell's Sunday services, had their children baptized by him, and placed their complete trust in him. However, this time Maskell didn't take Jean home. Instead, he drove past the Catholic hospital and industrial buildings surrounding the school, heading toward the outskirts of the city. Eventually, he stopped at a garbage dump far away from any residential areas or businesses. Maskell got out of the car, and the blonde, freckled teenager followed him across a large stretch of dirt road toward a dark green dumpster. She then noticed a body lying crumpled on the ground. Jean instantly recognized it as her teacher. Sister Cesnik was still wearing her familiar aqua coat, and there were maggots crawling on her face. Jean attempted to wipe them away with her hands before she realized that Maskell was actually threatening her, so she backed away and eventually just chose to keep quiet. Many years later, Jean would share that she had been systematically abused, manipulated, raped, and conditioned by Joseph Maskell for about 1.5 years before anything happened with Sister Cesnik. Jean remembers first confiding in Father E. Neil Magnus, Keough's religious services director, in 1968 about the sexual abuse she experienced from her uncle. Jean claims that Magnus then sexually abused her and accused her of being promiscuous. She alleges that Maskell later joined in the abuse, and she felt much more scared of Maskell, who she found to be more intimidating and threatening. Jean pushed her memories of the abuse deep down, and they remained hidden until 1992 when she started to recall certain events, like the time she confided in Sister Cesnik about what was happening to her. After that conversation, Sister Cesnik switched to another school and then vanished. Jean suspects that Cesnik might have been murdered because she knew too much. 2 months after Sister Cesnik disappeared, Police reported that two hunters had found the body of the missing nun in a dump near Baltimore. Sister Cesnik had choke marks on her neck and a round hole in the back of her skull about the size of a quarter. An autopsy revealed she had died from a blow to the head, likely from a brick or a ball-peen hammer. However, no one came forward with details about the murder, and the case remained unsolved. The investigation into Sister Cesnik's disappearance was led by Nick Giangrasso, a 28-year-old homicide detective who had been with the Baltimore City Police Department for 5 years. He oversaw the case during the 3 months Sister Cesnik was missing, but once her body was found outside the city, he had to hand the case over to the 2 detectives from Baltimore County. Now in his 70s, Giangrasso felt that there was something off about the way the police department and the church handled the situation. He noted the fact that her car was returned to her apartment complex without any signs of a struggle, indicating that she wasn't a victim of a random crime. The crime scene looked too clean, leading Giangrasso to believe it was someone who knew her. The first person of interest in Giangrasso's investigation was Gerard Keough, a Jesuit priest. Keough was the one contacted by Sister Cesnik's roommate when she realized the nun hadn't come back from her shopping trip, and he was also the one who reported her missing to the police. Keough was in a romantic relationship with Sister Cesnik at the time. 2 years prior, before he became ordained and before she took her final vows, he had proposed to her. Although she declined, they continued to see each other and exchange love letters. Just 3 days before Sister Cesnik disappeared, Keough called her from a Catholic retreat to express his ongoing love, indicating he was willing to leave the priesthood if she would leave the nunhood for him. The police brought Keough in for questioning, but he had an alibi for the night Cesnik went missing. He and another priest had dinner in downtown Baltimore and then watched Easy Rider at the theater. He provided receipts and ticket stubs and passed 2 lie detector tests. Despite this, Giangrasso had a strong feeling that Sister Cesnik was killed by someone connected to the church. He thought it was someone from within her social circle, the priests, and the religious order. As this investigation progressed, Giangrasso spoke with several priests who knew Sister Cesnik, and one name kept coming up: Father Maskell, who worked alongside Sister Cesnik at Keough. Giangrasso mentioned that he attempted to interview Maskell multiple times about Sister Cesnik's disappearance, but the priest always managed to avoid him. In 1969 Baltimore, Giangrasso noted that it was extremely challenging, if not impossible, to investigate a Catholic priest for any crime. The Archdiocese of Baltimore is the oldest in the U.S. and is seen as the leading Catholic authority in the nation, with over half the city's population identifying as Catholic. Maskell was particularly hard to pin down. At the time, he was the chaplain for the Baltimore County Police, the Maryland State Police, and the Maryland National Guard. He had a police scanner, socialized with officers at a local bar, and often went for ride-alongs with his police friends at night to respond to minor crimes or catch teenagers in their cars. His brother was once a police officer in the area. Bob Fisher, who owns an auto repair shop in southwest Baltimore where Maskell used to take his car during his days off, recalls how the priest would brag about his connections with the police to anyone who would listen. And so, for 20 years, the case went unsolved. Then, in 1994, 2 women came forward with shocking allegations against Maskell, linking him to the murder of Sister Cesnik. At that time, they were referred to in court documents as Jane Doe and Jane Roe. These women claimed that Maskell had raped them while they were students at Keough. They filed a civil lawsuit seeking $40 million in damages against Maskell, the Archdiocese of Baltimore, the School Sisters of Notre Dame, who operated Keough, and a Baltimore gynecologist named Dr. Christian Richter. One of the women turned out to be Jean Werner, and the other was a woman named Teresa Lancaster. Teresa Lancaster recounted that on Halloween in 1970, Maskell took her to a well-known spot where students hung out. When two police officers showed up and told the other students to leave, they raped Teresa while Maskell waited outside the car. Teresa, a quiet mother of four now, shared that when she was a junior in 1970, she visited Maskell's office to discuss some issues at home. Her parents had discovered a marijuana joint in her bag and disapproved of her long-haired boyfriend. During the school day, Maskell invited her into his office and closed the door. He then stripped her of her clothes and forced her to sit on his lap naked, claiming he was touching her in a godly manner. She never resisted or told anyone because Maskell threatened to expel her for drug use and send her to the Montrose School for Girls, a feared juvenile facility in Reisterstown, Maryland. She mentioned that he would sometimes hit her and show her the loaded gun he kept in his desk at school. Donna Vandenbosch, a nursing student from Reading, Pennsylvania, was at Keough from 1970 to 1973. She alleges that Maskell and some police officers also mistreated her. Jean would recount that during her final year, Maskell started taking her to St. Clement Church, where he was a preacher after school. There she claims a group of men assaulted her in his office. Although she doesn't know their identities, they called each other by generic names like Brother Ed, Brother Ted, and Brother Bob. She mentioned that some of these men would give Maskell money in return for the abuse. The stories of Teresa, Donna, and Jean are supported by court documents and interviews with 8 other former Keough students, 4 of whom say they were abused by Maskell while the other 4 managed to resist his advances. Former students at Keough reported that Maskell used his charm, psychological knowledge, and moral standing to initially disarm the young girls and then manipulate them into sexual relationships. He specifically targeted students who were struggling or misbehaving. He would ask the girls about their home lives, their relationships, or if they had experimented with drugs. The only person who seemed to care was Sister Cesnik. Jean remembers that in 1969, at the end of her sophomore year, Sister Cesnik took a moment to speak with her privately in class. The nun asked her if she was being hurt in any way by the school's priests. Jean nodded, too scared to speak. Sister Cesnik told her to endure summer and promised to address the issue. Kathy Hobeck, now in her 60s, recalled asking Sister Cesnik for help against Maskell's abuse when she is at Keough in 1968. Sister Cesnik would make excuses for Kathy when Maskell asked her to come to his office. When Sister Cesnik left Keough in the autumn of 1969 and started a new position at Western High School, she kept strong connections with her previous students who often visited her in her apartment. Maskell was a common subject of discussion among them. One anonymous former student recounted an incident during a chat with Sister Cesnik where Maskell and Magnus entered her apartment unannounced. Maskell shot a look at me, she recalled, feeling like he knew why she was there. Feeling uncomfortable, she decided to leave Sister Cesnik's place. The next day at school, Maskell summoned her to his office. Holding a gun, he threatened her, saying that if she ever revealed the abuse, he would kill her, her boyfriend, and her whole family. Before the allegations of sexual abuse against female students at Keough High School surfaced, Maskell was first accused of making an altar boy at St. Clement Church, Charles Franz, drink wine before sexually assaulting him. Franz and his mother reported this in 1967. In 1992, Jean publicly disclosed a second allegation of sexual abuse against Maskell. That same year, he was removed from his ministry and sent for an evaluation and treatment at the Institute of Living. However, in 1993, he was reinstated after the Archdiocese stated it couldn't confirm the allegations through its internal investigation. On September 8, 1993, criminal charges related to Jean's claims were filed by Maryland Deputy Attorney General Ralph S. Tyler III. Unfortunately, the lawsuit was dismissed after the court determined that repressed memories were not a scientifically accepted form of memory. In 1994, Jean filed another suit, this time alongside Teresa Lancaster and 4 others, which included allegations against the gynecologist Christian Richter for his involvement in abuse with Maskell. The Archdiocese lawyers successfully had this second lawsuit thrown out too due to the statute of limitations. Thankfully, Maskell was taken out of the ministry on July 31st, 1994. That same year after the abuse claims surfaced, he escaped to Wexford, Ireland, and was put on temporary leave, meaning he couldn't perform any priestly duties. Despite this, Maskell continued to work in psychology. Although the Archdiocese of Baltimore removed Maskell from his position in 1994, they still provided him with financial support. He finally died after suffering a stroke and passed away in 2001 at the age of 62. I'm sure he was met at the gates of hell. In 2023, the Maryland Attorney General's office would publish a report that revealed decades of childhood sexual abuse within the Archdiocese of Baltimore, identifying Maskell as one of the most notorious abusers, having targeted at least 39 victims. The report noted that Maskell was moved to St. Clement after being accused of abuse at his previous position, highlighting how the Archdiocese repeatedly ignored his misconduct. Many of the individuals who would eventually receive settlements are women, but there are also a few men, including one who claims that Maskell, who was a young seminarian at the time, abused him during a camp in the 1950s. All settlements were reached outside the court since the time limit for filing civil claims had already expired. Documents gathered by the Maryland Office of the Attorney General reveal that many survivors made detailed and credible allegations against Maskell while he was at the school, with incidents occurring in the 1960s and the 1970s. These allegations include rape, sexual assault, drugging, and threats of violence. Sister Cesnik would have turned 82 in 2024. This concludes today's story. For more true crime cases and celebrity stories, you can always go to the Black Rhetoric homepage to watch old and new videos. Until next time.